Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and a special good evening to our Bayou Blitz family. I am Bob Rose, and I'd love to welcome you guys to another Wednesday night edition of the Bayou Blitz podcast. I am one of your hosts, and joining me is my friend and my partner in crime, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Mr. Boylan?
So far, so good. We were just talking about some of the Twitter frenzy that happened today with Twitter Blue. So I'll go ahead and publicly say it, guys. Just double check before you believe and retweet and all that stuff. I'm guilty. I paid for Twitter Blue today. So I got the verified check mark, which I still don't quite understand that anybody can now be verified because, anyway, that's a different story for a different time. But
Right.
just please, before you guys start believing anything, tweeting at Bob and I, check the source. Don't believe everything you see because there were some really good pranks today, Bob, where people, had verified accounts and pretend to be Adam Scheffner and LeBron James. And of course, everybody sees the blue check mark and this got to be true. Well, guess what? LeBron didn't request a trade out of LA today, and Adam Scheffner did not break news that Josh McDaniels got fired because he didn't. So just double check your sources. And Bob, you and I can have a whole conversation on how you and I have yet to earn the check mark the right way. But that's an hour, maybe a 2 hour podcast for a different day of the week.
Yeah. Sometime I'd love to go toe to toe, with some of the verified, blue checks out there, and compare works and compare sources from either you or I. But yeah, that we'll call that a steel cage match for maybe the off season.
The off season. Oh, well, that'll sell tickets. We might be able to make some money on that one. We might be able to pay for Twitter Blue with that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. We might be able to get Vince McMahon to sponsor us. Who the heck knows?
Wouldn't that be something? Vince McMahon. Oh, good old WWE. He's not the guy anymore, though. We're going to have to find somebody else. Well, maybe we'll get him for a discount because he's not the guy anymore.
Yeah, right. He needs the publicity.
Good publicity. Anyway, Saints Ravens did not go according to plan for a lot of people. And you and I were on at the half, and we kept it fairly positive, or as positive as we could, because at least that last drive of the first half gave the Saints some momentum. Really should have been 6 points. Unfortunately, some miscommunication both on Callaway and Dalton. It doesn't go on one player or the other, but there was some positives there. Well, ultimately, Bob, the Saints only converted on third down 3 times for 27%. They converted on third down once on each one of their scoring drives, but they had more 3 and outs than they did third down conversions. Offense has been a major problem. The defense, they had their moments. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's a super special talent. I'm seeing some people already saying he's better than one of my personal favorites growing up, despite wearing some rival colors of the black and gold. I was always a big Michael Vick fan for just how electrifying he was. And all of a sudden, Lamar Jackson's in that conversation. Is he better than Michael Vick? I don't know. But nonetheless, a very special talent Lamar is. And he showed it against the Saints with a couple different plays where it looked like Cam Jordan had him for a sack. It looked like Onyemata had him for a sack. It looked like Peyton Turner had him for a sack. And boom, magic feet of Lamar Jackson. But nonetheless, Bob, what were some takeaways from that game for you, whether it's positive, negative, offense, defense, special teams, what have you?
First of all, like you said, I thought that the Saints defense played pretty well over the first quarter and a half. It was an aggressive unit. They laid some lumber on a couple of Ravens players, and they looked pretty confident. And then about halfway through the second quarter, this team, that unit just looked completely demoralized because of how many times Lamar Jackson had escaped. I think he escaped Cam Jordan 5 times in that game alone. That made what was a 14-3 Ravens halftime lead feel like it was 140-3, because that defense just looked demoralized. The offense, to put it politely and to keep it a PG-ish rated show, the offense took a major step backwards. Everything that went wrong for this unit over the first month of the regular season, not being able to pass protect, not being able to get push up front in the running game, absolutely brainless play calling, and piss poor execution. I just blew our PG rating.
Let me go back and edit. Hold on.
And poor execution. All of those things reared their ugly head. And people want to point to the coaches. I get it, and I get why. And to me, the coaches, particularly Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael, they coached scared. Your best asset was your running game for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Your best offensive players are Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. You didn't use any of those guys against the Ravens. And instead of playing to your strengths, you tried to get cute, outsmart yourself, and you were just that told me that they were afraid of what Baltimore could do, and they did not think that what they did best could match up with what the Ravens did best. That's on coaching. Outside of that, hey, the coaches don't miss the tackles. The coaches don't whiff on blocks. The coaches don't get pushed around in the trenches. So, I mean, I actually thought Cesar Ruiz played a solid football game. I thought Demario Davis played one whale of a game. Everybody else, you need to take one of those, men in black devices, and erase their memory. Hell, erase the whole season, and convince these guys, hey, you guys are the New Orleans Saints of 2020, 2019, whatever. Because everything that they have done this season is not working, and it's so anti-Saints. Those, in a nutshell, those were my very few pluses and minuses away from this game.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you when it comes to the negatives. I don't want to be too harsh on the defense. Like I said, Lamar's a special talent. There's not a lot of defenses that contain him extremely well.
Brendan, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you give up 93 yards rushing to a third string back, and it's not that I'm not a fan of Kenyon Drake, because he's a solid back, but nonetheless, he's a third string back. 93 yards on the ground, 80 in the second half. That is on the defense. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Good points. Good points. I'm with you that the first half, the defense played pretty well. Whether they got demoralized, like you said, I'm not sure. There's obviously some key injuries. We can talk about that too. Obviously, there was a projected injury report today as the Saints took the day off to recover with a short week. But the defense that everyone heard about this offseason, the defense that, in training camp, our own John Hendricks, along with every other beat writer that was present, said this might be the best Saints defense that we've ever seen. I still haven't seen that. I really haven't. And I know there's injuries. I know that because of those injuries, there's more chemistry issues. You're not getting used to playing with each other and this and that. But man, like at this point in the season, going into your 10th week this Sunday, you'd expect the communication to be better. You'd expect the intensity. The lack of urgency might be the thing that really bothered me on Monday night. Because like you said, I mean, for the first half, the defense was pretty good. Did what they could. You got to tip your hat to some of the plays that Lamar made. Okay, great, fine, so be it. But in the second half, I don't know whether you want to say uninspired. I don't know if you want to say lack of urgency, a mix of both. But it just looked like they were gone. It looked like just about everybody had thrown their hands up and been like, I don't know what more to do. And then offensively, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I just wrote a couple pieces tonight that'll be published tomorrow, so I don't want to spoil too much of it, but please give it a read. The play calling was awful. The play calling was terrible. I wrote a piece last week talking about my X Factors piece, and I highlighted Taysom Hill offensively. It's going to be an X factor.
2 touches.
Two. And thank heavens I didn't make him the stardom of the week for Saints fantasy football. Because I contemplated it. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to tell you guys to start Alvin Kamara because you guys should know that, right? I'm not going to tell you guys to start Chris Olave most weeks because, well, at this point, he's like the only receiver you can start. But I was thinking, Taysom might not be bad because it's going to be a team that you're going to want to keep the ball out of their hands. It's going to be who wins time of possession. How many times did we say that last Wednesday and in the pregame on Sunday? And the Ravens blew the Saints out the water in time of possession. They had 2 touchdown drives in the first half that spanned over 7 minutes. That's essentially an entire quarter that they possessed the football and came away with 14 points out of it. So the play calling bothered me more than anything. The way they utilize certain pieces. I mean, another one, we talked about it in the pregame, was Jordan Howard. How much was he going to be utilized? And
You got 1 snap, Brendan.
Jordan Howard's touches went to Dwayne Washington, which, fine, reward Dwayne Washington because he's been an anchor of the special teams unit. So be it. But that's what he is. And that's no disrespect to Washington because I was told at a super young age playing football, you can make an entire living off special teams. There's a buddy of ours who the Saints will be playing this week up in Pittsburgh, and Arthur Mallett, who's made an entire career off special teams. There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But if that's your specialty, and that's what we talked about John Harbaugh doing a great job with Lamar Jackson, playing to his strengths. If your strength is special teams, I'm not going to grab you and ask you to be running back too.
Nope.
I'm going to elevate the guy from the practice squad that had some really solid years in Chicago. If I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and check my notes, but I mean, borderline Pro Bowler some years in Chicago, was a great 1-2 tandem. Give him some touches. Reward the guy for being on your practice squad the last 3 or 4 weeks. So I don't know if it's so much the play calling that bothered me, but the lack of utilization of certain players that bothered me and bothered me greatly. And that's where my concern gets. And there was some, I don't want to say conspiracies, but there were some thoughts on why Carmichael kind of pulled his name out of the hat for the head coaching job. And I'm starting to see maybe some of it because the play calling this year has not been good. And if Carmichael was the head coach, I have no idea how bad it would be. You guys voted also. I'll bring it up real quick. You guys voted for us to talk about, is Dennis Allen on the hot seat? That's going to take a long, long time. That's going to be that might take the rest of the show, honestly, because there's so many things to get to. But my negatives was underutilization of players and their strengths, because that's what makes a good coach, right? That's what separates okay, good, and great coaches. How do I utilize the strength of my roster? And just to chirp on Harbaugh once again, that's what he's done so well over the years. He's been with the Ravens for what, 15 years now?
Something like that, yeah.
Somewhere in that range. And look at the multiple different makeups of those teams that have been successful in the AFC North. And he's adjusted to his strengths on his roster. And that's another thing Sean did so well. And if it wasn't adjusting to the strengths of his roster, he had, this is my mold, and he went and got players of that mold. Even Ty Montgomery a couple years ago. I know for a lot of people, Ty Montgomery not a great signing, or it doesn't matter. I thought that was a perfect mold for what Sean wanted to do, and Ty played pretty well in that mold. But nonetheless, it's hard to be hired as a head coach, acquire a team that you didn't put together. It's a lot easier to make that comparison in college sports when you have a college coach that recruited an entire class, and then another coach comes in, he gets a class he didn't recruit. Similar comparison. But Dennis has been with these guys for years and years. If anything, you should know your strengths, and you should understand, like, okay, I'm not Sean Payton. I'm not going to coach the same way as Sean Payton, but I understand what I have here. And to me, it just seems as if they're not playing to the strengths that Sean gave them. And it's not even like Sean left them a bad roster, you know? Shoot, going into the season, you and I both said, well, this is a team that should not just contend for the NFC South, but could potentially be a dark horse team to contend in the NFC.
Mm-hmm.
Injuries happen. You know, it wasn't on a whole lot of bingo cards that you'd lose Landry and Thomas for extended amounts of time. It wasn't on a lot of people's bingo cards that you'd lose Jameis at this point in the season. There's a lot of factors that came into play that you didn't expect. But guess what? That's the NFL. Every team has factors they didn't expect. And it's not like this team has played so terrible you can throw the whole year away, because somehow they've played just well enough to stay in the NFC South, which I think that speaks more to how bad the South is than the Saints are any bit good.
Oh yeah.
But nonetheless, they've been competitive in a lot of games. They've let some games slip through their fingers, very literally. But this is still a talented group. And so what it tells me is that there's a disconnect, whether it's between the coaching and the players, whether it's from the leadership inside the locker room itself. You know, some of those players not being the leaders that they need to be, because there are veterans throughout this team. This isn't a young team. So all in all, this game brought me a lot more concerns than anything, because I thought the Saints had turned a corner. But this one, and this is what makes this one, I think, frustrating for us, Bob, as people have to analyze this team.
Mm-hmm.
Because at this point, we're like, we don't know. You know, what is this team? You know, the old question used to be like, what is Taysom Hill? We found that out after a couple years. Now we're like, well, what is the New Orleans Saints? I don't know. Because I thought we're like, okay, this is what the Saints are after they beat the Raiders. And then this wasn't just like going backwards. This was going backwards and then some.
Yeah, it was a 180.
I think it was more than a 180. If I don't know. I'll
tell you what I think the Saints are. I think the Saints are a bunch of gutless underachievers that have gotten a little bit too fat on their own headlines. And I'm just calling it by the product that they're putting out on the field. People that are saying, this is an old team. Guys, not really. This is still much of the same core that absolutely dominated the NFL from 2017 through 2020. I know they lost Drew Brees. I know they lost Marcus Williams. But outside of that, you can't really name me any top end starters that they lost. Some key contributing pieces, Trey Hendrickson, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, even Alex Anzalone come to mind. But not guys that you could shoehorn into the Pro Bowl year in and year out. I know your starting quarterback is 35 years old, but you going back to what you said, Brendan, nobody had Andy Dalton as the Saints starting quarterback on your bingo card. So you can't count that. We all knew that Mark Ingram was getting up there in years, and his best days were behind him. He was probably on his last legs. But we also knew that Alvin Kamara was the focus of this offense. The entire starting offensive line is under 30 years of age. Michael Thomas, struggling with injuries, yes, but still just 28 years old. A rookie first-round draft choice in Chris Olave. Now, you did bring in an aging receiver that had been prone to nagging injuries in Jarvis Landry. That's reared its ugly head. Then you look at defensively. How much of the injuries really affected this unit? In the last couple of weeks, they have. But before that, you want to go back to your Saints bingo card. Who had Marcus Davenport not missing a single game up to this point in the season? He hadn't. Demario Davis, he's 33 years old, but you can't tell me he's not still playing at a high level. Same with Cam Jordan at 34 years old. Tyrann Mathieu, who, folks, if you recall, I did not like the signing at the time because Tyrann Mathieu, chronologically on the by the calendar, he's not that old. 30, 31 years old. Right now, he looks like an 80-year-old man playing out there. He looks like me. Like I would suit up, like I would look if I suited up right now. And that was my concern with Mathieu, is that last year with Kansas City, he looked old and lost a significant step. But outside of that, I mean, you have a developing Pete Werner, Paulson Adebo, Marshawn Lattimore, a terrific tandem of cornerbacks. Then you bring in Alontae Taylor. Marcus May, we thought had a whole lot of range. We haven't seen a lot of that. And the defensive line. Again, you go back to age. Outside of Cam, everybody else there is under 30 years of age. So this is not an old team. And even for the most part, the older play, who have the Saints' most consistently good players been? DeMario, Cam, and before last week, Andy Dalton was playing pretty efficient football. Those are the oldest guys on your roster. So you can't say that this team is fading because of age. I question, and I know I'm creating a whole lot of controversy, and I admit that I do not know the extent of the pain that these injured guys are going through. But I don't see, you talked about urgency on the football field, and yeah, I see a lack of urgency. I also question the lack of urgency by the injured players to get themselves rehabilitated and back out on the field. And again, I say that with full acknowledgement that I don't know the full extent of these injuries. None of us do, because A, we aren't those players that have the injuries, and B, you're never going to get a straight answer from many coaches at all, but especially Saints coaches, about the extent of injuries. But I'm talking about the product on the football field too. These guys that have never missed tackles in the bunches that they have missed this year. That's been eye-opening. A run defense that, again, most of its core has been intact, that has dominated the league for the previous 4 or 5 years. They're getting pushed around now on a weekly basis. An offensive line that kept an aging quarterback in Drew Brees upright and, for the most part, clean uniform week in and week out. These same guys, outside of Teron Armstead, who was injured a lot of the time anyway, these same guys now can't block a shadow. Alvin Kamara dropping passes, although that has been gotten much better in recent weeks. And the continuance of the receivers outside of Chris Olave to not get any separation. I mean, we could go on and on and on and on and on with these problems. That's what I see, and it all lumps itself into this. New Orleans Saints are playing like a gutless. I'm killing that PG rating tonight. A gutless bunch of underachievers that have just simply gotten fat off of their own headlines.
Yeah, all valid points, and it looks like a lot of the chat agrees with you. Scoob and JGP Jr. both tell you you're spot on with what you had to say there.
I might lose my credentials this weekend for saying that, but that's just my opinion.
I don't credential Bob this weekend for the game up in Pittsburgh, but we'll have to get to that a little later. John Butler says wide receiver separation was an issue last year. Yeah, sure. I mean, I talked about it, I think on Sunday. About that. It might have been Wednesday. I don't know what day.
Sorry to interrupt you again. Outside of Michael Thomas, wide receiver separation has been a problem since 2018. Let's face reality here.
It's been bad. Well, 19 Thomas was the entire offense.
Right.
Because that was, and people forget that year too, Kamara missed a lot of time. And the games that he did play, he was playing with a banged up knee. Yeah, there's a lot of issues. And it's an interesting point, Bob, because maybe you look back and you just say, these have been issues, but they were band-aided over by really, really talented players, whether it was Mike, whether it was Alvin, whether it was, even those later years, Drew Brees was Drew Brees, even those latter years. I mean, shoot, he had the one game against Indianapolis where he had like one incompletion.
Yeah.
And that at that point, he's 40 years old. Yeah, yeah. Drew is still Drew, and now all of a sudden, Saints fans are learning life without a Hall of Fame not just a Hall of Fame quarterback, a top 5 quarterback of all time.
Mhm.
They're quickly learning what life is without having the best offensive player in the league. In Mike Thomas, that was obviously 2019, and you're learning what life is when Kamara is the entire offense. And that's no knock on Alvin. He's a super talented back. And at this pace, knock on wood, and if he stays healthy, he's going to be a Hall of Famer.
Mhm.
And rightfully so. But you knew how valuable and you learned how valuable it was when Mark Ingram left to have a quality 2 back. And I think Latavius did a good job for 1 year serving in that role. But now you're quickly learning what it's like when Alvin doesn't have a running mate. Maybe that's something the Saints need to address in the offseason. And to your point about, are these guys really working super hard to get back? Do they have the desire to be out there and play for a team that's 3-6, doesn't really have an identity, doesn't know who their quarterback is, and this and that? The one argument you could make to being like, yes, Bob, they're probably doing that for a reason, and it's a basketball term, more than a football term, but tanking.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? The Saints don't have their first round pick this year.
Right.
So tanking doesn't do them any good.
Right.
Because right now, if the draft were to be tonight, the Eagles would have like the 6th overall pick, 5th or 6th overall pick of the draft. And that hurts.
Yeah.
Because if the Saints continue down the road that they're on and they finish with a poor record, good golly, you could fix a lot of problems with a top 10 pick. You could get the quarterback of the future with a top 10 pick.
Sure.
You could get another young receiver to pair with Olave. You could get the Demario Davis replacement, which right now looks like Pete Werner, but you could fix a lot of things here. And now you can't. Not saying that they can't find gems, because the Saints always do. Always seem to find some gems, whether it's undrafted, late rounds, whatever.
But where's your franchise quarterback going to come from? You don't find gems that way. You just don't.
I'm so glad you brought that up. For 2 reasons. Well, let's address 2 Saints quarterbacks of the last few years. One being Drew. You don't hit on free agents like that. Ever. Right? Drew, Reggie White. That's it. That's the list. Right? That's the list of absolutely killing free agency in the NFL. Jameis, you and I from the jump loved it.
Yeah.
I think you reported on the news at like 3:00 in the morning or something.
I did.
But we loved it from the jump because, you can develop him. He could end up being a good quarterback. But neither of us have ever said Jameis is going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback.
No.
We said Jameis is going to be a good quarterback. He could be the quarterback of the future for a long time. He could also just be a bridge quarterback. But you're willing to take that risk. John said he liked our Derek Carr suggestion from the other night. I don't think that's going to happen. But our point being here, 9 times out of 10, you get your franchise quarterback in the draft. You know what? Let's play a little game, Bob. And then we'll transition into talking about what the people want us to talk about, and then obviously into week 10. So to wrap up this week, let me ask you this. In your opinion, who are the top 5 quarterbacks in the league right now? No particular order. Just
okay. Okay, 5. No particular way. First of all, I take Joe Burrow over anybody playing. That's my number 1 guy. But top 5, Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Mahomes. I'd still put Justin Herbert's having a rocky season, but I really like Herbert a lot. That's my number 4. Wow. At number 5, put him in a hat. I'd go either Tua, at least by the way they're playing right now today. But I'd go either Tua or Jalen Hurts. at number 5.
Okay, Bob, what's the one constant with the 6 guys you just named?
Yeah, they're all young. They're all pretty mobile. Yeah, I think all but Hurts were number 1 draft choices.
That's where I was going. Because outside of Hurts, Mahomes would have been the latest picked at 11.
Mm-hmm.
Hurts would have been a second-round pick, a guy that I wanted the Saints to draft.
Same.
But that's what we're even in that case. That's what I'm talking about. That's what you're talking about. You're not finding guys in free agencies. Your franchise quarterbacks coming in the first round or really early in the second round.
Yeah, and Alan Ulrich said it on Under the Dome last night with the way, and I agree with him, with the way that the league overvalues and overdrafts quarterbacks now. You don't see a franchise quarterback fall to the second round like a Drew Brees did. Hell, like a Derek Carr did. You could make a case for Dak. Yeah, I know all about Tom Brady in the 7th round. That's an anomaly, folks. That was an anomaly then. It's just not going to happen now. A Dak Prescott in the 4th, that was just dumbass luck. And again, you can't count on your quarterback, your franchise quarterback, coming from dumbass luck. You need to go get him.
Bob just said, "Screw the PG rating tonight."
Yeah, at this point, yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
Let's be happy if I can keep it at rated R.
Oh God. Oh man. Well, that's our point. There's a lot of things the Saints need to fix, and there's not a lot of answers moving forward. So, with that, we're going to talk about what you guys wanted us to talk about. One of you guys said it's your favorite segment every week, so we appreciate it because we appreciate you, and we want to know what you want to hear. 100% of you, yes, you heard me right, all of you that voted, and the poll came late, I apologize. But nonetheless, all of you that voted for, I don't know if you guys can hear that pathetic drum roll or not through my mic. You guys want us to talk about, is Dennis Allen on the hot seat? We'll throw this stat at you. I found it really interesting. I got to give props to our boss, Kyle T. Mosley. That's the first time I saw it was this morning, reading an article he wrote on Dennis Allen and some of his quarterback choices over the last, not just this year, but obviously his past as well, in Oakland, which I can say Oakland. I don't have to say Vegas. Woohoo! Which I forgot about some of those that just made absolutely zero sense. But I digress. This is the 3rd time as a head coach that Dennis Allen has started a season 3-6. The previous 2 times, his team, the Oakland Raiders, finished 4-12. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in New Orleans. I think there's much more talent on this Saints team than there was in Oakland, but you never know, right? You just never know.
Who'd have thought they'd have started 3-6 with the talent that they have?
Hey, don't give me quotations. This is a talented group. It's just, how many times do I have to say it while we're on this podcast? I might say it for however many years you and I do this podcast together. Which may be a long, long time. But I've said it so many times. The NFL or any sports league, it's not Madden. You can't just throw a ton of personalities together and expect it to work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying there's cancerous dudes in this locker room, right? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, yeah, on paper, Marcus May was the number 2 free safety and free agency behind Marcus Williams. Tyrann Mathieu, great story to bring him home. Thought he still had some gas left in the tank. He still might. It's not working. Bob's saying no. I'm saying maybe. Maybe he does. I don't know. And you look at some of these guys and you go, okay, this should work. This should be fine. And it doesn't work. Yeah, Madden, it might work. Shoot, if I'm playing franchise mode, it might work. I'm not that good on the sticks anymore, guys. I'm just kidding. But nonetheless, it's not working. Whatever it is, something needs to change. I just went on a whole rant about Dennis Allen, Pete Carmichael, etc. Not utilizing their players to the best of their abilities, not putting their players in positions to be successful. right? And like I said, that's what makes a good coach a great coach, and that's what separates. Is can you take the guys on the field or in your locker room and put them in positions to be great? You want a perfect example? As much as at times I hated their bromance or whatever it was, Sean Payton did that for Taysom Hill perfectly.
Mhm.
He literally created a role for Taysom Hill that fit Taysom Hill perfectly. And that's what makes Sean Payton a Hall of Fame head coach,
Mhm.
right? I just went on that whole spill about how Dennis isn't utilizing talents the right way. I think that you, me, and some of our viewers, some of our readers with Saints News, I think all of us have some issues, questions, and whatnot about how Dennis Allen is acclimating himself to being the head coach of this team. Yes, it's different. We expected it to be different. We weren't getting a Sean Payton clone. That was very evident from some of the first media conferences that we had with Dennis. But the concern that I'm having is coaching scared, right? It almost seems like there's a lack of confidence there with Dennis, not just in games and press conference, everything. I don't want to say the guy's in over his head or seems that way,
I will.
but it's starting to come across like he wasn't 100% prepared for this.
And I think you put it politely. And I advocated the hiring of Dennis Allen when it happened. I liked the hire at the time. I knew he was going to be a different guy than Sean Payton, which depressed me because I love Coach Payton. And I tried to play devil's advocate with Dennis Allen. I said, look, his previous opportunity in Oakland, he was a young guy. He was with a dysfunctional franchise with absolutely zero talent. And I pointed out examples across the league of guys who, very, very, very successful head coaches, that were frankly failures in their first time, on the sidelines as the head guy. Pete Carroll, Mike Shanahan, Bill Belichick is probably the best example. And I thought that with Dennis Allen being tied with Coach Sean Payton for so long, that maybe he picked up a couple things. Maybe he learned from his previous errors. Maybe he grew up. And I mean that figuratively, not literally. Maybe he grew up here. And it would be able to blossom. And so far, none of that has been true. Dennis Allen took a team that Sean Payton nearly took to the playoffs last year that was a shambles of itself. And like we pointed out early in the year, or early in the show, early in the season, the defense wasn't ravaged with injuries. Jameis Winston had Jarvis Landry. He had Michael Thomas. He had a healthy offensive line. And Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael have absolutely run this into the ground. Now, I put equal blame on the players because, as I've said every week, and I think even tonight already, the coaches don't miss the tackles. The coaches don't whiff on blocks. The coaches don't run the wrong pad, et cetera, et cetera. But I stand by my statement before that Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael not only are coaching scared, but look like they're completely 100% in over their heads. Like these men have already drowned. That's how bad it is. I don't see any urgency in their eyes, in their actions, and the way that they carry themselves. I don't see them holding the players accountable for their mistakes, and that's a big part of coaching. Even your star players, if they're not performing well, you need to do something to get them to play at their optimum level. Sometimes that's benching. Sometimes that's a threatening of benching. Sometimes that's blasting them out on the practice field in front of everybody. Sometimes it's taking them behind closed doors and blasting them. Sometimes it's a combination of those approaches. Well, these coaches are doing none of that. Again, much of the same defensive personnel that dominated the league as recently as last year is now getting pushed around on a weekly basis. And just that, yeah, Chauncey Gardner Johnson's absence does not cause the collapse that we have seen. Uh, the collapse has come from established players. And you have not only a great defensive mind in Dennis Allen, and I'll die on that hill, but a couple of great defensive minds in Ryan Nielsen and Chris Richard, too. Maybe on the defensive side, there's one too many hands in the cookie jar. On the offensive side, we all knew that Sean Payton's the offense was Sean Payton's baby. It was his creation, and yeah, he was the czar. But we also knew that there was a litany of coaches, Pete Carmichael included, that were a big part of weekly game planning, weekly decision making on the sidelines. Now you're missing both Peyton and Breeze, and we knew that there were going to be some bumps in the road. But again, you look at the talent that the on paper talent that this offense possesses, and the fact that they're running around, turning the ball over on a weekly basis in bunches, and just coming up ridiculously, pathetically short when they need to come up with plays or need to come up with a big game to support a struggling defense. I hold Pete Carmichael as responsible as I do Dennis Allen for these failures thus far.
Well, that's interesting. I think what you said too, you lose Sean, you lose Drew. Lombardi has been gone for a little bit, but a big part of the Saints' success, as well. Shoot, even Dan Campbell, who's become like the lovable guy of losing coaches. Everybody loves what Dan Campbell brings to the table. I mean, he was a big part of what the Saints were doing during the 17 through 20 run as well. They've lost a lot, but the one consistent's been Carmichael. When you even look at the years where Pete called the plays, yes, you had Drew. Yes, you had some of the most talented Saints offenses that the league has seen. Honestly, I mean, 11 was a Carmichael year, right? 11, you and I are our favorite Saints team. Honestly, maybe a little bit more for me, maybe a little bit more on the Super Bowl team, just because of how electric they were. Yes, you had the greatest show on turf at that point, statistically. But that was a creative offense. And yeah, Drew had a lot to do with that. But where is it? Where's the creativity? Going off what John said just a little bit ago, Dennis Allen used Taysom right, then he forgot how. Where's the creative juices? Does that fall on Dennis? Does it fall on Carmichael? Probably a little bit of both. I don't think, to answer the question that people want, I don't think Dennis is on the hot seat. And here's why. He's been with the team for so long, A. There's obviously a trust and a foundation built between the Bensons and him, Mickey and him. Mm-hmm. The old saying goes, it takes 3 years. It takes 3 years. And he got 2 and some change in Oakland before they pulled the plug. He's going to be around. He's going to have time to bring in his own guys. Unfortunately, at least unfortunate to me, maybe not unfortunate to some of you, Jameis doesn't appear to be one of his guys. And I really wanted to see that. It's going to be in my mind, it's going to be one of the biggest what ifs. When we go back and look at this team in 20 years, especially if they really struggle the next 3 to 5, it's going to be one of the biggest what ifs of, what about Jameis? And some of that's on getting hurt, and that's a part of it. It's a part of life. Adversity gets thrown your way. It's about how you respond. And Jameis is continuing to have adversity thrown at him. I hope he's able to at least get the opportunity. That might be a poll next week if the Saints lose, especially if the Saints lose in Pittsburgh with a bad offensive outing. That's going to have to be a poll. Is it time for Jameis to come back? And I think some of us are actually saying now, what do you have to lose at this point? But nonetheless, I don't think Dennis is going anywhere. I think he deserves a lot of the blame for the Saints' struggles this year. I think Pete Carmichael does as well. I don't think enough's being talked about of Nielsen and Richard, but I think they deserve some too. I think the whole coaching staff does. And going back to what Alvin Kamara said earlier this year, going to what you said, Bob, about practices and not holding people accountable. And he flat out said, mistake would be made, they just laugh about it and keep going. And no, listen, you coached Bob. You are a Hall of Fame coach. Throwing that out there for the people that didn't know, Hall of Famer Bob Rose right there. You're a
Thank
Hall
you.
of Fame coach. Something goes wrong in practice. You don't like something, right? Even in track and field, something happens. And you're like, no. Do you just laugh about it? Or does a little bit of angry Bob come out? Because I know the answer to this question. I think some of you guys who've watched this show long enough know the answer to this question too. It's rhetorical. You don't have to answer it, Bob. But
No, it's all right. I will answer it because I'll tell you what, folks, I have mellowed a lot in the last 10 or 12 years. I have mellowed a tremendous amount in the last 4 or 5 years. Any of the kids that I coach, and they'll always be kids to me. Any of the kids that I coach will tell you that they were absolutely terrified to make a mistake. But they were also terrified to be terrified of making a mistake, if that makes any sense. Paralysis by analysis. You never made the same mistake twice with me. You learned from it. You figured out why you made it. But at the same time, you were always going to stay aggressive because nothing made me angrier than a lazy player. Be it volleyball, football, track, whatever the case was. I realize that nobody is perfect, but you learn from your mistakes and you stay aggressive. And our practices, if we had a bad practice, I guarantee you, I promise you, we never had 2 bad practices in a row because all of us would pay for a bad practice or a bad performance. And by that, I mean, there was a serious amount of accountability. And that's not, and I took self accountability too, not only as a coach, but as a player myself. Again, volleyball, football, track, it didn't matter. I held myself to a high standard. I didn't need a coach to get in my face to tell me I was effing up because I was my own harshest critic. And that's what I question about these players. Are you holding yourself? Yeah, we keep talking about accountability, but these guys are professionals. They need to have self-accountability too. And that's not something that I am seeing on any level right now. And by self-accountability, I am including these coaches too. I'll circle back again because that is the primary topic before we get into our Steelers preview. Is Dennis Allen on the hot seat? No, I agree with you, Brendan. He's not, but he should be. Because not only is he not holding his players accountable for their mistakes, he's not holding himself or his staff accountable either. I do believe that unless the Saints go winless or just win one of their remaining games, that like it or not, folks, Dennis Allen is going to be here in 2023. What I do think is going to happen, Pete Carmichael is not going to be your offensive coordinator. He's either going to retire or be promoted to a senior offensive assistant or some kind of flashy title. I guarantee you there's going to be a change in the defensive coaching infrastructure. That Dennis Allen will not be in charge of the game planning or not be in charge of the play calling on game day. And you won't see this bullshit co-defensive coordinator stuff. Nielsen and Richard both might be gone, but I guarantee you there's only going to be one of them as defensive coordinator at the very most next year. So I do think that there's going to be some major changes expected. That's going to be expected of Allen by Mickey Loomis and the Benson family. And he's going to be on the hot seat entering 2023, but he's going to be the coach.
Fair analysis. And to quote what you said, if you want to do the office thing where it's what is it? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott. You said never make the same mistake twice. Never make the same mistake twice. Gus Fring, Bob Rose, for all your Breaking Bad fans out there. Let's go to Steelers. As we got about 10 minutes left in the show.
The black and yellow, you Yinzer idiots. It's black and yellow.
Man, you just showed your Pittsburgh saying yin, but nonetheless, yes, as Wiz Khalifa would say, black and yellow, black and yellow. He's from Pittsburgh, right? Wasn't that whole song about a car and then the Steelers used it for the Super Bowl run or whatever? Anyway, it's a little too young for Bob, but I mean, what am I talking about? Bob's only 30. It's right in your range, right? Oh man. So the Steelers, they're an interesting team as well. They similarly to the Saints, up until last year, have had a head coach for a long time.
Mhm.
Mike Tomlin has never had a losing record. It's going to change.
Mhm.
Definitely going to change this year, as they're just not that good. And everybody expected a little bit of a rebuild, especially when you draft a quarterback as high as they did with Kenny Pickett. I was surprised to see he wasn't the starter from, day one. Surprised me a little bit as they went with Mitch Trubisky, who has my favorite award of all time. The what is it? The Nickelodeon playoff
Um,
game MVP thing, or whatever the official name of that award is. That is my favorite award ever, particularly for how bad he played in that game. But anyway, kids are always right, Bob. You know that. You have a couple.
mhm.
But yeah, the Steelers 2-6, 1-2 at home. The Saints 3-6, 1-2 away. The Saints, according to ESPN, are 62% favorites to win this game on the road. But the Saints can't win outdoors, Bob. They can't play in outdoors. They can't play in the cold. But this is a Steelers team that has some question marks. Obviously, Kenny Pickett's thrown like 8 interceptions this year. Najee Harris hasn't been super healthy. He was a big fantasy guy this year. He hasn't been healthy. He's fumbled the ball. He hasn't found the end zone. There's a lot of question marks there. And then you have the Steelers that got rid of Juju Smith-Schuster in the offseason. They traded away Chase Claypool. I'm just naming out some of their top receivers, Bob. You don't got to shrug at me like that. Why don't Juju Smith-Schuster? I mean, in your defense, Bob, I mean, if you're talking about the Saints from last year prior to Michael Thomas coming back, it'd be the equivalent of me being like, oh, the Saints let go of Marquez Callaway, but okay. But yeah, there's a lot of questions with the Steelers' identity. There's a lot of
Mhm.
questions for them moving forward as well. Is who would ever thought Mike Tomlin would be on the hot seat? But is Mike Tomlin on the hot seat? Are they going to ride it out through the rebuild? Are they going to try to do a complete teardown and rebuild? But nonetheless, this is a Steelers team that gives up a lot of yards.
Uh-huh.
Bob, you did a great piece today. I won't ruin it, but you guys go read it about how the Saints can have a bounce back week on the ground, especially up there in Pittsburgh. I think it's safe to say Ingram's not going to play as he's recovering from that MCL sprain, but do the Saints see a little bit more of Taysom Hill, especially playing on a natural surface where it's going to be cold? Bob, our weatherman, telling us it's probably not going to be above 40 degrees up in Pittsburgh this week. So you could see a heavy dose of heavy run play for the New Orleans Saints. Is that how you see it? And is that the biggest weakness of the Steelers team, is the rush defense?
No, believe it or not, the biggest weakness of the Steelers' defense is actually their secondary, but they're giving up a lot of yards on the ground too. This is a Pittsburgh defense, and I know this is a wild statistic for you longtime Steeler fans, but the Steelers' defense ranks 29th overall, 31st against the pass, and 16th against the run. Now that's 16th against the run after finishing dead last in that category in 2021. Pittsburgh's given up 300-yard passers. 5 players have at least 70 yards on the ground against them, and 11 players have over 70 yards receiving against them. 6 of those are 100-yard outings. But having said that, this is without Michael Thomas, probably without Jarvis Landry, and with Andy Dalton as your quarterback, this New Orleans team cannot expect to win by throwing the ball 35 or 40 times. While the Steelers secondary is probably their biggest weakness, they also get who, in my opinion, is the best defensive player in pro football. TJ Watt will be back in a Steelers uniform this Sunday. He'll probably be on a limited pitch count, but after we've seen some pass rushers and what they've done against the Saints pass protection this year, that has to have you terrified. That's another reason why the Saints need balance. And I agree with you. I think Taysom, we'll see a heavier dose of Taysom Hill. We'll see Alvin Kamara not only heavily involved, but I've noticed with Alvin Kamara, you need to get him involved early, especially as a pass catcher, to keep him interested in the game. And to maintain, if you're the Saints, to maintain that balance, to keep the Steelers defense, in particular their pass rush with TJ Watt at one end and Alex Highsmith, a very underrated defender, on the other. The Steelers run a base 3-4 front. but they mix and match in the secondary because Mike Tomlin and defensive coordinator Terrell Austin have not found that combination on the back end that they like yet. But again, if you're the Saints, who are your most consistent receivers? Yeah, Kamara, then Olave. Juwan Johnson is an underrated tight end. It developed into an underrated tight end, but after that, you have a huge drop off. So to get people like Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, to get them open, you need one-on-one coverage, and you need your quarterback to have an extra second because Smith, Callaway, etc., they aren't good enough to get quick separation on their own. I think after 2 years, we have seen enough proof of that. So to give your quarterback an extra second, you have to have that running game to freeze the Steelers at the second level, at their linebackers where they're most aggressive and most athletic. So, yeah, I do think that we'll see the Saints put up some offensive numbers this Sunday, but it's going to have to start with the running game and dominance up front.
I definitely agree. This is a game where, on paper, I think you and I would agree would be a little bit more fun and ideal to have a guy like Jameis who could really sling it against a really weak secondary. I think rushing the football is going to be big. I'm just curious to see how the Saints come out, and kind of counter what they did this past Monday. It can't all be Kamara. Kamara had a season low in rushing yards last week. He needs a complimentary back. Is it going to be Taysom? Is it going to be Jordan Howard? Like, who is it going to be? And commit to it. You said it best. Taysom had 2 touches? 2. Howard played 1 snap. Commit to whoever's going to be the running back, number 2 back. Because Kamara has never been a guy who is going to carry the ball 25 times for you.
Not between the tackles, no.
No, and they're not going to Christian McCaffrey it either, where they run the entire offense through it. At least McCaffrey in Carolina. So who's going to be the complement to him? They got to figure that out if they want to be successful. Defensively, it's going to be a little interesting for New Orleans. Pickett can be a little bit of an elusive quarterback, but he's been really turnover prone. Not even dating back to college. That was one of the biggest knocks on him, is how much he turned the ball over. Great story. Played in Pittsburgh in college, playing for Pittsburgh in the pros. I think he was overrated in the draft personally. But going back to what we talked about, that's how quarterbacks are evaluated now.
Right.
Can't really blame him for that. Guy got selected, got a nice little paycheck, and he's a starting NFL quarterback. Congrats, Kenny. You did it, kid. But nonetheless, turnover-prone guy. Don't know if the Saints are going to get Lattimore back this week. Like Bob said on the show last week, you can't really count on anybody. Even if you're anticipating they're going to come back, you really can't count on anybody till you see it. Believe it when you see it type of a thing. But the Saints still have a talented secondary without Lattimore. They have a pretty good pass rush. Obviously, Davenport's injury is a little got some question marks as well, but Peyton Turner has been healthy. He's had some moments this year. How do you get in the head of Kenny Pickett?
You pressure him. Just like all rookie quarterbacks. But this could be a get-well game for the Saints pass rush and their defensive line in particular, because the Steelers might have the worst offensive line in pro football. They do have They do have some skill position talent. Najee Harris, who has been ineffective and really banged up this year. I feel bad for him because he's getting a bad knock. But I think when healthy, Najee is a good running back. Pat Freiermuth, you keep an eye on this name in the upcoming years. He's a Travis Kelce type of player. And I hold Pat Freiermuth in that higher regard. He is that talented at tight end. George Pickens. Chris Olave is my favorite and top-rated receiver in the draft. George Pickens was my steal coming into the draft. And whatever round a team ended up getting him, and Pittsburgh got him in the second round, George Pickens is a franchise wide receiver. They traded Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson for now is their featured receiver. And Deontay will get catches. But George Pickens is the biggest receiving threat, the most dangerous receiving threat for that Steelers team. But you got to pressure Pickett, and you got to shut down the Steelers running game. Najee is still a capable back, and we're hearing a lot of things out of Pittsburgh that undrafted rookie Jaylen Warren is going to get more touches because he's just been more dynamic this year. You have to keep the Steelers from establishing any kind of balance early on. And if you're successful in doing that, you're now putting the pressure on a rookie quarterback with zero pass protection in front of him. And we know, even though the Saints were struggling with Lamar Jackson last week, they were still in the Ravens' backfield a lot on those passing plays. So, like I said, this could be a get-well game for this Saints pass rush, and frankly, it needs to be. Everybody talks about the Saints turnovers on offense, and yeah, that's still a big problem. The Steelers have turned the ball over 14 times, which is ranks 28th in the National Football League, and are averaging only 15 points per game. This is I'm getting a lot of feed on my timeline, both Twitter and Facebook, from Steeler fans saying, "Oh my God, we're in a sorry state if we can't beat this Saints team coming up this week." And I laugh, and I responded on more than a couple occasions. I'm like, it's funny because we're all saying the same thing about the Saints, about your Steelers this coming week. So both teams have had similar difficulties, and it'll be very interesting to see which team gets, I'm not going to say healthy, which team overcomes their shortcomings first.
Absolutely. Also, Pickens, catch of the year? I think so.
That I've seen so far, yeah.
Yeah, definitely catch of the year at this point. Really a lot of talent in Pittsburgh, a lot of young talent. I think that might be the one difference between New Orleans and Pittsburgh is I think they have a lot of young talent. A lot of unproven talent might be a better word. Saints have some young guys, but they've been proven commodities in the league, while Pittsburgh has a lot of guys that have not proven that they're a commodity in the league. So that is going to be interesting as well. Bob, unfortunately, out of time here this Wednesday, and we're probably not going to see you on Sunday. That's some sad news, right? Bob over here is credentialed. He will be at, I was going to say Heinz Field. What is it now?
Acupuncture Stadium. I don't know.
I can't keep track. These names change every year. Heinz Field.
There are still some Yinzers that'll call it Three Rivers, even though that's a completely separate building. It'll always be Heinz Field to me. But yeah, unless I screwed up and shot my mouth off one too many times tonight, I am supposed to be in the press box and at the stadium with our John Hendricks on Sunday. I'm really looking forward to that. I may be able to pull off a pregame show, folks. That's still in the working. I'll do my best because it'd be an exciting venue to do it from. But I can promise you I won't be able to do halftime.
Yeah, so we'll work out some scheduling conflicts for the ever so popular Bob Rose. Might have to sneak John in as well. I mean, John and I did a pregame show for a year as well, and he's always got good insight. So we're excited to have first time for both of you in the same stadium at the same time, covering the game. So that'll be great for all of you covering, or for us covering the game, and you guys reading and following along with the Saints News Network. With that, Bob, where can everybody follow you while you're tweeting live from the press box this Sunday?
Folks, thank you for tuning in for another Bayou Blitz podcast tonight. I am sorry we tried to get hook up with Craig Wolfley and Rudy Reyes, both friends of ours. Both of them had scheduling conflicts, so we'll try to get both guys on at a later date. So we're sorry for that. But in the meantime, you can follow me over on Facebook, Bob Rose. I'm on Twitter at BobbyR2613. You can follow all of our work and publications through the Saints News Network and at Saints News on Twitter. Obviously, follow our Bayou Blitz Facebook page and at Bayou Blitz Pod over on Twitter. And folks, thank you guys so much for everything that you do for the Bayou Blitz and for both Brendan and I personally, along with John Hendricks and Kyle Mosley. I feel pretty strongly I could speak for them. Keep building your product up because this is your product. We're just your mouthpieces. So let your friends know about the Bayou Blitz. Tell them when to find us, where to find us, how to get in touch with us, and let's build this show, continue building your show into a national power. You've done a great job of it so far.
Bob, I'm just impressed that you remembered our Twitter handle. I'm so proud of you, Bob. You're growing right before my eyes. For myself, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. I have a lot of fun stuff coming up, a lot of things I've kept under my hat, a lot of things coming into the new year. I have a really important meeting tomorrow for some of that, so I'm really excited to share some of that with you guys.
Nice.
Just really excited. And just to speak to what Bob said, I'm very thankful for the support. This was Bob's show to start, so that you guys welcomed me in with open arms, and you guys have done a great job. Not just growing the show, but just weekly interactions been great with every single one of you guys. I feel like every time we log on for a Wednesday show, I get my regulars, in here, and whether it's just having your names pop up a little bit and answering some questions or whatever it may be, it's like Bob, you've said it perfectly. It's a little family. It's a little get together. Mm-hmm. It's a little bonfire. It's a cookout. It's a low country boil. I mean, it's how it is every Wednesday.
It's truly fun. It feels like a midweek tailgate with you guys every week, and I mean that so complimentary. I know I speak for Brendan and definitely myself when I say we have a blast doing this, and it's because of you guys.
Absolutely. So we appreciate everything that you guys do. Make sure you follow us over on Twitter at Bayou Blitz Pod. We'll give you an update on what we're doing on Sunday. We'll have some sort of show, whether Bob's here or not. I will at least be here. We could, worst comes to worst, Bob. You just send me a photo. I'll get like a cardboard cutout. We'll throw darts at. Just I won't. Somebody might through their screen.
You know what? We're gonna have to take a couple screenshots. Yeah, that Eagles debacle last year. I took a screenshot of my facial expression on our halftime show. Remind me, I will send that to you. We could use that It's an angry Bob face. We could use that as a cardboard cutout for me. As a stand-in for me every now and then. And you never know. If I get booted out of the press box on Sunday and I get thrown into Yinzer jail, maybe they'll let me have my phone because I'll be able to do a live on spot halftime broadcast from the Ohio River.
Scoob also says virtual darts, so we might have to get something worked out here. But
fair.
No, and
at least make them fleur-de-lis shaped.
There you go. Virtual darts from Scoob, and John just emoji'd it. Nonetheless, guys, we really appreciate everything that you guys do. We mean that wholeheartedly. Excited for some things to come, not just on my end, but on the show's end as well. Have a lot of things that we got to get rolling, Bob. I still owe somebody a T-shirt too. We got to talk about that. And I'll say it even without Bob's permission. I'd like to give some Christmas gifts out too. Because we're getting to that time as well. It'll come out of the deep pockets of me, but we'd like to send some things out to some of you guys, whether it's merch. We'll figure it out.
I was gonna say that's all on Santa Boylan. I'm the Krampus of our show. So if Santa Boylan is gonna reward the good Bayou Blitz boys and girls, I'm gonna come and get you if you're bad. We'll make me the villain of the show. I don't mind that.
Oh, you've painted yourself in that light for a long. Well, shoot, last week you said I was the more likable of the two.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. You know what? Let's put up a poll. Which of the two is more likable? I promise you'll win. It's only a matter of the over under by how much.
Oh God! All right. Per Bob, Sunday morning before the pregame show, I will put out a poll. Who is the more likable host, me or Bob? You make me do such silly things for this show, but I love it. But all right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in this Wednesday. That's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. This has been the Bayou Blitz. Until Sunday, find peace, spread love, practice positivity. Whether it's Bob and I or just me, we'll see you on Sunday.
Do that.